We're going to go ahead and we're going to read the entire chapter of Romans chapter 7 here in just a moment. Can I get split it up into like 3 different people, 8 verses, and then the last person can have a bonus verse since they're special. Have somebody read 1 through the first 8 verses. Alex, the next 8. Lee, and the last 9. Rob. Okay, and while everybody's getting ready to read that, Alex, you'll start here in just a second, but I wanted to kind of update, unless you were going to make an update, Rob. We had the area singing, or not the area singing, the singing at Hillcrest Nursing Home today, and the song that you picked right there was the only song we didn't sing today. I mean, we sang a lot of songs. We started with 2 people there that were residents. One of them was one of our own, Miss Leela. We had over 20 members that were there today, so we had a huge turnout. And by the time we got done, I think we ended up 14, 15 people over there on the resident side and stuff like that. And so I encourage you on the 4th Sunday of every month. It'll happen again next month, the month of October. You know what day that is, Rob? October 25th. Is that right? There you go, at 1:30. Meet at the nursing home around 1:20, 1:25, since we kind of know what we're doing now. So I encourage everybody to come, and thank everybody who came out to support that, and thank Rob for starting us off with that. Alex, if you could start, and then you just kind of read in your sequence, everybody. We're getting in Romans chapter 7, verse 1.
Husband died, she is free from the law, so that she is no adulteress, though she has married another man. Therefore, my brethren, you also have become dead to the law in the body of Christ, that you may be married to another, to him who was raised from the dead, that we should bear the fruit of God. For when we were in the flesh, the sinful passions which were aroused by the law were at work in our members to bear the fruit of death. But now we have been delivered from the law, having died to what we were held by, so that we should serve in newness of the Spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? Certainly not. On the contrary, I would not have known sin except through the law, for I would not have known covetousness unless the law had said, you shall not covet. But sin, taking opportunity by the commandment, proceeded in me all manner of evil desire, so apart from the law, sin was dead.
And I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin became alive and I died. And this commandment, which was to result in life, proved to result in death for me. For sin, taking opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So then, the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. Therefore, did that which is good become a cause of death for me? May it never be. Rather, it was sin, in order that I might be shown to be sin by effecting my death through that which is good. That though the commandment sin might become utterly sinful. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am in flesh, sold into bondage to sin. For that which I am doing, I do not understand, for I am not participating or practicing what I would like to do, but I am doing the very thing that I hate.
If I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, it is sin living in me.
Bless you.
For I have a desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I do want to do. Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. When I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner
Thank you, three gentlemen, for reading. And now that we've got that done, I need to get an apology out of the way. Apparently, I offended Carol Ludwig in a very great manner this morning by telling her the outcome of the story of Jekyll and Hyde. If you fall into that same group, I apologize as well. If you weren't there, I don't know who did it. But you try to say things and make sure you think things through and everything like that. And so I had the entire thing. I was like, okay, I'm going to break it up and put the conclusion of the story over here. And, so I'm looking logistically and everything, not even thinking about poor Miss Carol, who has been so deprived that she's from Oklahoma and they don't read much there. I'm from Oklahoma, so I can say that. But I encouraged her to, watch it on Netflix or get the book. But it's, so you look at that, you see as Andy prayed, as the sinful natures, the two different natures within us, when you look at this passage, what sticks out, with the exception of sometimes if you're reading it out loud and doing the do and not doing what you shouldn't do and what to want, that it can be very tongue twister. What stands out to you in this? Alex?
What stands out to me the most is the very beginning.
Okay.
Paul's describing the law, basically, is symbolizing between a man and a woman being married.
Mm-hmm.
Something that most all of us in the group can
Relate?
relate to, yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that probably for you and your studies with some individuals right now, it's even more relevant for that particular passage. And I thought that as well as we got to that. Miss Johnny?
Well, it tells me what I already know.
It tells Miss Johnny what she already knows.
But that the devil is the one that's influencing us. He puts that in us.
That the devil is the one influencing us. Okay. Andy? You have to have an awareness of sin for it to what? For it to be impugned to you. Okay. Anyone else? Rob? Okay. Okay. Brian? And then Daryl?
Not the law's fault that I make a mistake. It's mine.
Okay.
Sin working in me.
Okay. Daryl?
What kind of that we would not know sin were it not for the law.
Yeah. And Paul tells us there, hey, I didn't know about this coveting thing real well until I found out about the law, and then I really started to covet more. It's kind of like the little kid when he sees the sign, keep off the grass. What does he do? Walks on the grass. And it's the same thing with a lot of times when, something's brought to your consciousness, then it's kind of like even a song that plays on the radio. You hear it, and then you can't get it out of your head. You're made aware of something. Then you go, Miss Carol, and did you have your hand up again, Miss Johnny?
Yeah.
Okay, Carol, then Miss Johnny.
Well, when you're talking about life, you're a child. A child doesn't realize evil. He hasn't been taught. And he'll come to a particular age when he has hopefully been taught.
Mm-hmm.
But up until the time he's been taught, he's an innocent little child. So where is that line where he is innocent and then he's not?
Okay.
It's because he's been taught.
Okay. Carol says that, a child is innocent until they learn, that they are taught evil or taught the law. And then she says, so where is that point to where they are taught that? And I think that I would add to that, though, is that a lot of times children aren't taught something. They may learn it from being watchful, but they also have in them the desire of selfishness, to do something for themselves. I want another cookie. So they take that cookie. Why? Because they've been taught to take another cookie? No. Maybe not even seeing an older sibling take the other cookie. Roy was an only child. Roy, did you ever take an extra cookie? See? So as we just displayed in Roy, selfishness. Frank, do you have your hand up, or somebody over here? Patty? Right. Patty kind of said that, as a child, as they learn, as they grow, as they mature, that it's a learned behavior and everything to make choices. And, in order to make those choices, they can't do that as an infant, where they're hungry, they cry. They need the diaper change, they cry. And so what occurs then is, until they reach the point, which is what they call a higher level learning, to where they can have a thought to say, okay, if Jim takes the cookie, there could be a consequence from Deborah. So when he gets into the higher level thinking, and, Jim, I'm assuming you're there. I'm just using you as an example. So, but, so he's going to want and understand that, okay, I want that, or, ooh, but he starts to realize that there could be a consequence for that action. Miss Johnny? Lust of the eyes, the flesh, and everything. Okay. Okay, so you're saying that the lust of the flesh and the eye is put there by Satan. He introduces it, but do you allow it in, or does Satan put it there without your acceptance? Miss Johnny says that the Satan puts it there without your acceptance. Thoughts on that? Huh? What she's saying is that, and if I say this wrong, then clarify. She's saying that the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes is put in us by Satan. We don't, it's not something we accept in. It's something that's just put in us, and then how do we get it? And when does it be put into us?
That's what John tells you in 1 John. That's the way we are tempted. The way he comes into us.
Right, that's the way we're tempted, but when being tempted doesn't mean we allow that entrance, right? And because you can not succumb to the lust of the flesh or the lust of the eye, right?
Now you have that desire in you to do some of this stuff.
She says, but it stays there, you have the desire to do that stuff. Andy?
I can learn the gospel. I can become a Christian and be baptized. But if I've kept all my life and I've never studied the God's word, the word of God, then I can continue cussing and not be aware that it's sin until somebody points that out to me. Hey, that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. Same with any sin that you do, until you know it's a sin. How is that, even though you become a Christian, that's where you have to study the Word of God. You have to keep going to know these things aren't necessarily wrong in your life.
Okay, so you're saying that until somebody tells you, you don't know the difference between right and wrong.
Until you learn whether they tell you, whether you learn it from the Bible, or whether somebody points it out to you.
Can I get somebody to read Romans 1, 18 through 23? And then we'll go Alex, then Mark. Romans 1, 18 through 23, please.
For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds,
four-footed animals and crawling creatures.
So we know within us, we have a knowledge of God. Do we have a knowledge of right and wrong? Maybe not, until we have that cognitive ability of that higher level thought process to discern right from wrong. Obviously, that child isn't born with that ability to discern right from wrong. We always toss around the phrase, the age of accountability, and that varies depending on the maturation level of an individual. So we have to look at where does that point break. And the ultimate thing as we get to here is that sin, that lust, that struggle that you have in your life will remain in you and remain alive in you unless you're allowing God and the Holy Spirit to work in you to remove it. Because there's some sin you can get rid of. I think that, but there are certain sins for certain people, and it's not the same for everybody, to where there's a deep struggle. And that's Paul is talking here as a mature Christian, and we'll get to that aspect of it a little bit later, to where he's not that new babe in Christ that struggles, because a new babe in Christ struggles. And I don't think that there's anybody in here that doesn't sin. It might not be the same sin over and over, but we still have a sin in our life. Let's take some input real quick. Alex, Mark, Carol. Not that Carol, this Carol.
Speaking about temptation, James makes it clear that temptation, we're tempted, we're drawn away by our own desires and desires.
Mm-hmm.
Then when the desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, sin when it's fully grown into a death. The person before that says to not blame God for our temptation.
Right.
So that's another one thing that I saw from that passage, not blame God for our
Yeah, and let's
Second thing I get from that is there's no mention of Satan in this passage. It says we're drawn by our own desire. This desire is already in us to do what we want to do. Satan doesn't have to put it in.
So you're born with a sinful nature. Somebody read out of the NIV verse 5. And then Lee, who's got NASB verse 5? I know that's a good point. NIV verse 5? In the NIV. Yeah, chapter 7 verse 5. Go ahead, Jeremy.
For when we were controlled by the sinful nature, the sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in our bodies, so that we bore fruit for death.
Okay, that first clause I want everybody to listen to. So when we were controlled, and please correct me if I miss anything. So when we were controlled by sinful nature, okay? NASB, someone? For when we were controlled by the flesh. Okay, right there. So when we were in the flesh, so we have sinful nature in the flesh, NASB. Okay? So just on the words that are used there, just the words alone. I mean, I know you can say what that and understand what that means. What does that mean if you read that? Lee, what is in the sinful nature? So if you're a controller in the sinful nature, what do you think that means? Does that mean that when you're born as a baby, you have sin? Or you have a sinful nature? And is there a difference, Terry? That's open to anyone. Terry, what do you think? And then we'll go you, Carol. Just wait. Be patient, sweetie. To totally overcome.
As I mature, I've come to realize that just like Jesus did in the Sermon on the Mount, to the Jews, he keeps raising the bar on what his sins that go on, and I ain't overcoming.
You haven't gotten rid of all the sinful nature in you. Does that mean that if you still have sinful nature or you struggle with that, you're not a good Christian? Yeah, it did sound like the church lady, didn't it? And here's the thing, is Paul's not accepting it in this passage, especially, 21 through 23 and 24, 25. He's not accepting it. He's stating this is the battle that's waging. He's not giving into it. He wants to defeat as much as he can, right? Just 1 second, because if I don't, she will cut me off at the shins. Miss Carol.
Okay. Many creeds will teach that baby born is born in sin and is a product of evil.
Mhm.
But when we remember how, when the people discovered America, they found the Indians here, and those people had never heard what we call the truth necessarily.
Mhm.
However, they did recognize that there was beauty and power in nature and special blessings.
Okay.
So they were able to see there is more to life than just flesh. They knew that.
Okay.
So as you read in Romans 1, we can see that even though we haven't necessarily been taught.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to try to paraphrase all that. Carol says that we know that some teach and some creeds and some doctrines teach that a baby is born with sin. Part of that is from a translation from the NIV, and I believe it's Psalm 51, verse 5. You can check me on that. Check me and correct me on that. But the way the NIV translates that tends to say, oh, you were born in sin, that type of thing. But that's that type of thing. She also said that even when explorers first came to America and they arrived in this country, and the Native Americans and everything, the Native Americans, without being exposed to the gospel or the doctrine of God, knew that there was a flesh side and a spiritual side, not calling him Yahweh, but calling him often the Great Spirit in the sky or something to that effect. Again, as Carol says, that kind of validates or is in agreement with Romans chapter 1, 18 through 23 that Brian read a little earlier. Brian, then Mom. I should probably just go Mom first, but you had your hand up earlier. But I'm going to roll the dice.
Well, I think you're doing a disservice to this verse, though.
We're not there yet. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I think you're doing a disservice by just pulling out that first part
Which part?
while we were in the flesh.
Okay. The reason I bring in the flesh part up wasn't to separate it apart. It was to show and specifically look that there's a different context and meaning carried with it the way sinful nature or passions or in the flesh is worded. Not to, separate it, but to say that one is the other. But when you read it, because the NIV translators in the first, in the 1977 edition, in the 1984 edition, and then when they revisited in 2011, that was the battle that they had. The word there in the Greek is sarx, the flesh. And of course, the NASB, they're going to rock steady on in the flesh. But they didn't want people to think that they couldn't have any control and that to not sin, that because it's just part of you have flesh, so therefore it's sin. So they weighed that and went with sinful nature to try to say, this is something that you have in you that you must battle. Okay? Mom? Sorry, I was pointing at you, Jeremy.
Unless you become like those little children, so if those little children are already steeped in sin, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, Mom says, unless you become like the little children, like Jesus said, like unless little children, you're not going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. And we see, I think it's, somebody read verse 9 here in chapter 7. I think it's verse 9, because it kind of carries that same type of meaning, Mom.
And I was once alive apart from the law.
Okay, right there. Once I was alive apart from the law, I mean, I didn't know any better. Then go on.
But when the commandment came, sin became alive and I died.
Okay, so that's when sin became alive in him. And, I know he's talking about it in a general sense, but you look at David, right? 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 15. Let's go to the next page, verse 23. He said, somebody flip over there. I think that's right. 2 Samuel 12, 2 Samuel 12, verse, the whole passage there's 15 through 23 where he's fasting, he's weeping, all the stuff. But verse 23, I think, is where it says that until I meet him again. Talking about the son that had died, and he's looking forward to saying, I'm going to meet him again. Well, how's he going to meet him again in heaven, looking forward to meet him? Is that right? Reach 23?
Now he has died, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him.
Go to him.
Not return
Okay, so like mom said, that child, you look at Ezekiel 18:20, hey, the son doesn't inherit the sins of the father, and the father doesn't inherit the sins of the son. I've got Andy Payson syndrome tonight. And the thing is that I think we would all readily admit that we struggle with sin. It might not be the same sin all the time. You may have different sin that pops up all the time, different times. But I think that as long as we say and sit back, and what Paul's saying here is, we know that we shouldn't sin, right? I think we all agree that we shouldn't sin. We know that, but yet we all still mess up and come short of fulfilling the law in its entirety. So we have that aspect that we need to look at. When we see the law and the law makes us aware of the sin, Paul says, hey, that's when I became dead. Andy, Patty. Okay, you guys know the story of the two wolves, the grandfather of the young boy. Have you guys heard that? There were two wolves, young son, the grandson, that live inside of you. A white wolf that represents good, and a black wolf that represents evil. And they're constantly waging war within inside you at all times. And these two wolves, this white wolf and this black wolf, wage war all the time. Well, grandfather, who then wins? Who wins this war that's going on inside of me? The one who does good or the one who does evil? And the grandfather says, the one whom you feed. Is that the one you're referring to? Okay. Thanks for putting me on the spot. I don't remember who was after Andy. Patty, you get no more questions.
He creates these perfect human beings at this point, but then they do have a choice.
Okay.
And so at that point, we did have a sinful nature because at that point, they did choose to sin against God.
But they didn't. They didn't. They weren't born with it.
But they were not born.
Okay, look. I'm going to reiterate over here because, until we get some new mics dropped here that we're getting, by the way. Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, born with sin? No, niet, nada, zilch, nil. Okay? But they, for some reason, had a desire to sin, to disregard what God had told them, therefore calling that a sinful nature, a sinful desire, a desire to go outside of God. Would you agree with that? Or will you say they're born with sin? You're saying they're born with sin? No. What are you saying? I'm just tossing him under the bus here. How do you sin?
I hadn't thought about it this way because I was actually disagreeing with earlier comment that, Satan puts it in us. And I was like, I don't know about that. But after Patty mentions it that way, so I think about it this way. Adam and Eve were told, don't eat off of that tree. You can eat off every other tree, but not that one. You got to do this with the seeds, and et cetera, et cetera. And they didn't think it looked good. They weren't even looking at it or anything until Satan came along and said, hey, doesn't that look good?
He tempted them by changing one word, didn't he?
He did.
He added a 3-letter word. What was it? Not. Or Jeff, if you leave off the other F. Go ahead.
So I don't think it was in their nature to be that way. But as Paul said, once I learned the law, that's when I realized, that does look good. Satan did put that in them by saying that not word. He changed the rule. When he changed the rule, it made them question. When it made them question, it made them look. When it made them look, it says, Eve said she saw that the fruit was desirable.
Yeah,
Right?
her eyes were open.
Her eyes were open, and she went, that does look good. It's just like the servant of Elijah's eyes being open to the everything around him. It's just like other instances in the New Testament where their eyes were open and they suddenly saw. They didn't have a desire or an interest until their eyes were open. And their eyes were opened by Satan. He brought that sin into their life, or that desire
Okay.
into them.
Okay, hold your ears for a second, Carol. It's kind of like in the Jekyll and Hyde when he started to give Hyde that voice or brought them aware, that's when it started to grow. Okay, Carol. Miss Johnny, you agree with what Brian said? Do not tell him that. His head's big enough. Miss Johnny says you're close. Sin is a transgression of the law. Okay? But if you don't know the law, can you still sin? But you're still sinning. The truth is still the truth, whether you know it or not. You can still drive through the state of Connecticut with a radar detector, not knowing it's against the law, and still get pulled over. Hold on just a second. What's that? Did you have something else? I heard you wanted to add something, Patty. You agree with that, what Brian said? Okay. All right, Carol.
If they had never been tempted by the devil had not come on the scene,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel from what you're reading here that they would have taken a closer look at the food and then picked that out and took it and partook of it?
All right.
Or would they have continued in their innocent way following what God had told them? Did they need that extra little push?
Mark, I had you sit next to her for one reason, so she wouldn't ask questions like this. Here's what Carol asked. Troublemaker. She said if Satan never arrived on the scene, would Adam and Eve have eventually sinned? However, the answer to that is in the third book of Hypotheticals, chapter 4, verse 1, quote unquote. They would have never been tempted. So no.
Well, but then that calls into question God's plan.
But it calls into God's plan, but then it's still the free will for Satan. And you look at Ezekiel and Isaiah 12 and 28 and all that, to where it's like, where he says, I will be equal to the power of God. I will be this, and to where it's, there's that double meaning with the king of Tyre and everything, to where, he falls. We don't know the exact time frame. We know it was obviously before Adam and Eve were, before he got there, because he wouldn't have just like came after the fact. That would have been like one of those Back to the Future things. So we know when that took place. So regardless of how, I think, or where we're at, we know that we have sin in our life. I think we would all agree that we're not born with sin. I think that you let me ask you this then. Carol, will that little child, other than Roy, who all the cookies are his, still take the cookie without being taught and tempted by Satan? He knows that mom said, Brian, don't take the cookies. Is that a temptation from Satan? Or is that Brian saying, but I really want a cookie? What's that? Selfish desire. So it comes from within, because what did it say in James, Alex? Tempted with their own desires. Betty, were you stretching? It's learned behavior. But that's what I'm asking. So can a child do something for the first time without learning it from somebody else? Yeah. So I don't think it necessarily has to be a learned behavior. Brian might just want a cookie because he likes cookies. But the first time, right. But I'm just talking about that. Yeah, the second time, if he gets away with it, he's taking 2 cookies. Yep. Mark Coggins. I'm sorry, Betty. Did you have something? Unless he's they'll still take it. Smack. Ow, quit it. Ow, quit it. Ow, quit it. It's a cookie. And it's not one of these new Thin Mint Oreo cookies that are like this thin. It's the real kind. Mark, what are you thinking?
So,
Because there's stuff that's left out here right now.
an infant, a baby who has no consciousness of himself or herself, can't sin. So I don't think about it as a baby. I think about it like somebody who's maybe 30 years old, but has
Someone 30, like somewhere like me.
Right, well, not like you in mental capacity, but someone who's
Someone higher than that.
much lower.
Oh,
You know, people who are born without cognitive ability.
absolutely.
They're able to live and function, but they don't have, they're unaware. They draw
Right.
breath, they can eat, but they're not able to make decisions on their own. It's not just, and God is just.
That's
God,
right. That's key.
to hold those people accountable for what they cannot possibly know.
Exactly.
No, nothing I do with God's word with this person can ever bring that person to a saving knowledge of Christ. Now, I have an obligation to take that message to the people who live on the planet Venus, who we don't even know who they are yet, because there is a way for me to get the message to those people if they're there.
We know there's only women on Venus because men are from Mars.
So, but I need to get the message of God to them. And so they're accountable. Just
Absolutely.
like whenever we talked about the noble savages, you know,
Mhm.
people who were here who knew something, they knew there was a God. They didn't really know what to do about him. But I had an obligation to get the word to them.
But like that child or that 30-year-old who doesn't have that cognitive ability for a higher level thought process to think abstract thoughts such as God, that goes to what Mom said, that unless that 30-year-old man, woman is essentially a child in their age and their mental capacity in the eyes of God. Would you agree with that? I mean, as far as what we know, if they can't comprehend right, wrong, and what the process is or what they need to as far as salvation, that's where grace comes in. That's
The only issue that I had is the term child versus infant. So I was careful to use the term infant, not child, because I don't know for a child.
Mhm.
You know, that child who knows.
Yeah.
Said, don't take the cookie, and then the child takes the cookie. You know, I don't know that.
because Terry's he's a bright dude. And so he probably understood a lot of times, even though he was a man, because we know that men mature at a slower rate, he probably understood being bright, cognitively able to think through the consequences. If I take this cookie, I could get in trouble, but if he gets away with it for the first time, like Betty said, and then the second or third time, so when he gets that consequence, he still knows it's there. So he may be 4 years old, but it may take somebody else till they're 12. Some people may never understand the concept, right? The thing is we aren't going to win the battle with sin on our own. First and foremost, clearly, we lose the battle of sin on our own unless we have Christ's death, burial, and resurrection to take away the sin from us. We get into chapter 8 next week and everything as we start to look at the Spirit, living in the flesh, being children of God, heirs of God. And as children, we're called to want to emulate the Father. Most kids, want to emulate their parents. We want to emulate our Father in heaven. We just saw that Paul, who was a great evangelist, still had that struggle. The key is who are we feeding? If we're going to use, Andy's analogy of the white and black wolf, who is being fed in our lives? And what are we putting up? What kind of hedge are we building around our heart to protect ourselves from Satan tempting us? Our own desires can be triggered by a thought. I was working with somebody who had a gambling addiction. Gambling addiction started really innocently enough, if you all think that gambling is innocent, but just going to the racetracks here in Omaha once a month. Had plenty of money, take $50, bet on the horses. Okay, member of the Lord's Church. Got to be $100 a month. Then it got to be $100 every 2 weeks, and then $100 every week. Then it got to be $400 every week. Then it got to be, I can't pay my mortgage. I can't pay my mortgage again. Still, no one in the family knows what's going on. Able to keep it from his wife and everything. Until she gets the call from the mortgage company. It's like, look. She happened to answer the phone. She answered the phone and goes, look, you're 3 months behind on your mortgage. We're about to foreclose on your house. You haven't made a payment. And she went, what? So for this individual, it wouldn't be wise for him to go to a racetrack after he's no longer gambling. He's clean for probably about 36 months now. He's sober, as I call it. He's gotten through those battles. But 3 weeks after we met, he had a trigger. You know what the trigger was? It wasn't a horse. It was a college basketball game on TV, knowing that the NCAA March Madness tournament was coming up and he could make that money back that he owed. So when I say we need to build the hedge, we don't know where it's going to trigger. If you struggle with lust, you don't know if you're going to turn the TV on and there's this woman who's scantily dressed who's selling a car or TV or whatever, and that could be a trigger. The temptation is out there. We can succumb to our desires and act on it, but a lot of times we end up feeding that sinful part of the sinful side of ourselves unintentionally. And what I mean by is turning on the TV, putting ourselves in a situation or being put in a situation to where we're uncomfortable or something like that. Maybe your struggles with language, and then you're sitting at the water cooler, we talk about those water coolers, so often, and I don't even know they have water coolers anymore, but you're standing at the water cooler and you hear the language and starting up and the dirty story and the gossip. Get out. The first thing this individual did when he saw the basketball commercial, we had a game plan set up for him. He had a process of what he needed to do to remove himself from the situation and a game plan. In fact, we role-played the 2 week prior of what to do when a temptation occurred to make sure that when it came, he didn't have to think. He immediately removed himself from the situation. He was on the phone with me. He was on the phone with his wife, and we had a plan in place. It's the same way when we have a struggle with sin. That's what is so good. Why does it say to confess your sins to one another? So you can know all the dirt on everybody. No, so you can encourage everybody and hold each other accountable. I'm at 6:46, and we are getting ready to get into verse 1. No. So I'm running late, so I'm going to end. But I want you to understand that we all sin. We all fall short. Everybody, including the wonderful evangelist and rhetorical speaker named Paul. Did Paul have the ability to perform miracles? Did the apostles? Did they sin? What's that? Yeah, his shadow healed people. We're going to have sin. It's it's important, it's imperative that we are prepared for the battle. And it's important, like Patty talked, that we start preparing our little ones to realize that it's a battle out there. Because whether you're in a public school, a private school, homeschooling you have some control, but when you get into a public college, until they start homeschooling college students, even at Christian schools, because do they teach things that are incorrect at York? Absolutely. Do they teach things that are incorrect at Oklahoma Christian and other schools? Absolutely. Do they teach it at Northwestern and University of Nebraska? Absolutely. But unless we bring our children up, unless you and I are on guard and ready to be aware of what's going on and be able to question, then we're just saying, come on in, Satan. Build a home. I've got a room reserved for you. Shut the door. Keep out the devil. It's supposed to be a song. If there's anything we can help you guys with tonight, if you're struggling with sin and you need prayers, it's not about gossip about things. And, we've created this